The Palestinian Children's Bill is sponsored by Representative Betty McCollum. This bill prohibits the use of any funds that are made available for assistance to Israel in support of one, military detention, interrogation, abuse, or ill treatment of Palestinian children, and two, seizure, appropriation, or destruction of Palestinian property and forcible transfer of civilians in the West Bank, and number three, unilateral annexation of Israel of the West Bank territory. It also asks for the Department of State to report on the nature and extent of such activities carried out by Israel. This bill was initially introduced in April of 2021, but did not receive a vote in Congress. It was reintroduced for this congressional session. As you all know, Israel is accused of apartheid by leading human rights groups, including Amnesty International, and it receives at least $3.8 billion in US aid annually. We'll be talking with our esteemed guest today. Our first guest is Aya Ziada. She's the Advocacy Director for Americans for Justice in Palestine Action and American Muslims for Palestine. She is a Palestinian American human rights scholar, advocate, and writer who has a track record in organizing awareness of Palestine and other crucial human rights issues. Aya has over 6 years of political and grassroots advocacy and lobbying campaign experience. This experience consists of being a legislative staff member, a lobbying intern working closely with the ACLU, and an organizer working with several different organizations and coalitions, providing her with an extensive knowledge of all the spaces contributing to policymaking and advocacy. Thank you so much for being here today, Aya.
Thank you for having me.
Alhamdulillah. We also have with us Tazeen Hassan. Tazeen Hassan is a human rights advocate and policy writer associated with Justice for All Canada as an advocacy manager. She's the proud recipient of the Harvard Spotlight Award 2020 in recognition of her impactful work on raising awareness about the Uyghur genocide. Additionally, Tazeen has co-authored 2 books published in Canada. Her insightful features and analysis pieces have been published in reputable media outlets such as the BBC, The Independent, The Clarion, and Express News. And her primary focus has been on human rights and addressing genocide. Tazeen remains dedicated to advocating for justice and promoting the importance of human rights on a global scale. Thank you so much, Tazeen.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we also have with us, and we're so lucky to have with us, Jennifer Bain, who directs the Palestinian Activism Program for the American Friends Services Community in Chicago. Jennifer began her advocacy for Palestinian children after working as a teacher in a Quaker school in Ramallah during the first Palestinian uprising in the 1980s. She also, during those years, she also worked as a field worker and researcher for Save the Children, documenting the impact of the first popular uprising on Palestinian children under the age of 16. Jennifer has worked with AFSC since 1989, organizing dozens of speaking tours, conferences, educational workshops, protests, delegations, and public events. And she has produced 2 documentary films about the Palestinian American community in Chicago. She currently works with the Defense for Children International Palestine on their joint campaign, Israeli Military Detention, No Way to Treat a Child. We're so grateful to her for being here because she co-leads the educational project Gaza Unlocked with her AFC colleagues in the US and Gaza. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time.
Thank you so much.
So Aya, let's begin with you. So Congresswoman McCollum released the following statement about her bill. She says not $1 of US aid should be used to commit human rights violations, demolish family homes, or permanently annex Palestinian lands. Please share the stats behind this statement.
Yeah, so a lot of our organizing actually goes around US aid to Israel. So it's one of the most controversial topics when it comes to this issue, given the fact that Israel receives over $3.8 billion in military aid from the United States annually. And this is aside from extra funding that they receive via Congress and also outside sources such as nonprofits, like there's 501c3 organizations that are directly funding settlement expansion within the West Bank. Um, and so obviously 100% we agree with Representative Betty McCollum. And this is our biggest issue. This is the thing that we lobby the most against. And it's not only to condition aid to Israel, but also just to completely suspend it until Israel can uphold human rights. As we all know, the Israeli government has broken almost every international human right, every Geneva Convention, and it not only violates international human rights law, but also U.S. law. So as a country, we uphold ourselves in being almost like the saviors of the world. We're constantly talking about how we would like to uphold human rights in all of these countries and making interventions. And yet when it comes to Israel, it's the only country in the world to receive unconditional funding, which means their military funding is not trackable. So if you look at the last 2 years, the cases of Omar Asad, who's a Palestinian American citizen who was murdered in the first month of 2022, and nothing could happen. We couldn't track the weaponry or anything that was utilized because of the fact that our funding to Israel is not tracked. The same thing goes with Shireen Abu Akleh or the invasions that have been occurring. And so the funding is at the root cause of this issue. And that's exactly why one of the biggest questions that we always get is why should we be talking about this issue within the United States? And it's because US funding to Israel is the biggest harm to the Palestinian cause.
Jennifer, this bill notes that between 500 to 700 Palestinian children aged 12 to 17 are detained by Israel every year and prosecuted before military courts. Is this a fair number?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. It is a bit difficult to track the exact number because one has to rely on the Israeli prison services to tell you how many Palestinian children are in detention every month. And sometimes those figures are available each month, sometimes they're not. And they actually are just a snapshot of that particular day. But reliably, between 500 and 700 children each year do go through the Israeli military system and through the military courts and are prosecuted and detained. Just this week, Save the Children has put out a new report, also verifying these figures, saying, that this is continuing. Those are the same numbers that they're receiving. 13,000 children between the ages of 12 and 18 have been prosecuted and put into military detention since the year 2000. And so this practice is widespread and systematic. And while those figures are talking about people, children who have actually been charged and put into prison, there are also thousands of other children who are detained on the way to school, some under the age of 12, blindfolded. They might be held for a few hours. Any visitor to the occupied territories will probably see people pulled aside from the road, particularly men and boys, but even children on their way to school. So it is widespread and systematic, and those figures are very disturbing. No child should be prosecuted in a military court system.
And before we talk to Tazeen about the military court system, I wanted to ask you what charges are being placed on these children. I mean, it just seems so um, Twilight Zone-ish that so many children would be arrested and detained. What are the charges placed on them?
Right. Well, a lot of times, the majority charges, when charges are actually given, tend to be for throwing stones. That seems to be the most common charge. But actually, children, over half of them are arrested in the middle of the night. They're blindfolded. They're taken away from their families. They don't have their parents with them. They don't have a lawyer present. They aren't given a charge. They're not told. The parents aren't told what their child is being charged with. Often, what happens is that children do confess to these charges, particularly after a lot of pressure on them. So many are held in solitary confinement. As I said, they don't have legal representation. They don't have their parents there. They're asked to sign a confession in Hebrew, which is a language they don't even understand. And, you know, if you put yourself in the place of a child, you just want to go home. You know, for a lot of these children, it's the first time they may have left their village or their refugee camp. So it's a terrifying, terrifying experience for children. And it impacts them for the rest of their lives. And of course, their families and communities that are impacted by these soldier invasions. And yeah, that's why so many people, so many organizations, UNICEF, Human Rights Watch, Defense for Children International, Palestine, all these groups have been saying for decades now that these abuses need to stop.
Tazeen, can you talk a little bit about how detentions and prosecutions differ under the military system?
Thank you, Sister Hina. I mean, it is important to highlight that these detentions are administrative, characterized by arbitrary nature, similar to the detentions under Public Security Act (PSA) in Kashmir. Israel's administrative detentions are non-bailable. Even once released, the detained individuals can be rearrested without any charges, perpetuating a cycle of injustice and trauma. In addition, it is important to acknowledge that Israel, as a member of the international community, has signed most of the international treaties, conventions that safeguard the rights of children. For instance, Israel is a signatory of United Nations Convention on Rights of Child and the Geneva Convention, which prohibits arbitrary detention in occupied territories. And then, despite these commitments, the reality on the ground reveals a stark contrast. The treatment of Palestinian children under the Israeli military detention system continues to be marked by widespread and systematic violations. And then, as Jennifer told us, I mean, there is massive evidence. The evidence collected by various reputable organizations like Defense for Children Palestine, Save the Children, CP, GME in Canada, Amnesty International, United Nations, even Commonwealth, provides comprehensive account of the mistreatment under the military detention, as you asked, torture, denial of fundamental rights, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, even children are denied medicines, essential medicines, on which their physical survival depends. One child got blind. We have covered that in JFA blogs. So military detention, I mean, this is prohibited according to international law, and children are suffering a lot because of the nature of administrative detentions. These children can be arrested again and again. I mean, similar to Kashmir, as I told. So these are the things that international law doesn't allow, but Israel is practicing that. And I believe that it is due to the financial aid that Israel is receiving from the powerful countries, the most powerful countries on earth, like USA, Canada, other Western powers, and of course, the investment that we see in Israel. So I believe that we should address that. I mean, the Western countries can address this issue of the children detention, especially, and ending the occupation. So this is it about the military detention.
Well, thank you guys so much for that. We're going to take a quick break. and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. We were just discussing the brutal night raids and the treatment of Palestinian children under the Israeli military court system. Tazeen, could you explain to us why this bill is so important?
Thank you, Sister Hina. To answer this question, that why this bill is more important, we will have to see the context. According to the Congressional Research Service, Israel stands as the largest cumulative recipient of the US foreign aid, with the United States providing a staggering $150 billion in non-inflation adjusted bilateral assistance until February 2022. The commitments made in 1999 through a Memorandum of Understanding further solidifies the US government's obligations. Then there is a minimum of 2.67 million military aid. In 2019, they again raised the money to 3.8 billion annually. So this aid is going to Israeli military, and Israeli military is using it to expand the territories, expand the occupied territories, expand the settlements. And then this issue of the children imprisonment, or the issue that HR 3103 is addressing, basically it's a byproduct of the occupation. Israel is getting the military aid, the aid from the US. So this bill basically makes the Israel accountable. If this bill is passed, it will make the Israel accountable to show where they are using this amount, using this aid. So if this aid is going to the military expenditure, then it will be prohibited. Not $1 should be used for the military expenditure, or expanding the territories, or arbitrarily detaining the children. Hope, yeah.
I'd like, Aya, your organization that you represent has been working on this issue from a point of directly impacted people for a very, very long time. Why is this bill important to your work?
Yeah, and that's a good question. This bill is important at its foundation. It's giving Congress a very simple tool to simply address the issue at hand, which is the occupation of the Palestinian people, and the harm, obviously, that comes to not only Palestinian children, but Palestinians as a whole. The US has a track record, again, of supporting Israel. I don't want to say blindly. I think it's been very conscious up to this point. However, it's been very unconditional. So we directly play a role in the oppression of the Palestinian people. As Palestinians continue to be ethnically cleansed, our US taxpayer dollars are being used to commit these human rights violations. So it's a very basic bill, very crucial to start the process of shifting the common narrative and support for Israel.
Jennifer, you've been working on this issue for a very long time. Can you share a timeline of past concerns by US administrations about the status of Palestinian children? This can't be the first time anybody in the US administrations have raised this issue.
Yes, it is. It is hard to believe that something that has been so widespread and systematic since the 1967 occupation of the West Bank, it's been happening. I mean, it's generations of Palestinian families who, I don't think you visit one Palestinian family on the West Bank and everyone has had a family member go through this horrific system. Kind of stunning, though, is that until 2017, there had never been a piece of legislation in Congress that really addressed this issue in a specific way, and one that took it from looking at a Palestinian rights perspective. So often the U.S. Congress looks at Israel and Palestine through a security lens and what is in the interests of Israel's security or American security, and not from a perspective of what are the rights that need to be protected. And if one doesn't understand what is at the base, what is the root cause of violence and insecurity, then how is one going to address the security issues for sure? And of course, nobody was talking about Palestinian security, only Israeli security. So when Representative Betty McCollum in November of 2017 introduced the first bill, that was really groundbreaking. And I know at the time we weren't sure that there would be other members of Congress who would support her, but they did. And as you see, this is the fourth iteration of a bill that specifically is focused on Palestinian human rights. And over these years, as somebody that is kind of a veteran of talking about Palestine and working on child rights issues, I just see more and more Americans, more and more members of Congress saying enough, like enough. When faced with the overwhelming evidence, all this documentation, it just has to stop. We especially for populations who are the most vulnerable, like children. Every community treasures their children. Every person, every religion, values family and the importance of community. And that's what the military occupation, these military laws, the continued unaccountability of U.S. aid to Israel is violates. It breaks down communities and families, and it destroys children's lives. And what kind of future is that for anyone?
I wanted to ask if you all thought this bill would ever be brought up to be debated in the House committee, especially with the committee being led by Michael McCaul, who is a staunch pro-Israeli Republican.
Well, do you want me to answer that?
Yes.
It's one thing to have a bill introduced and to get sponsors. It's another for a committee to bring it to a larger vote. And of course, a bill like this stays in the Foreign Relations Committee. And it's one thing when you have Democrats in charge, but even when they were in charge, the bill didn't come for a fuller vote, and probably will not likely come with the Republicans in leadership roles. But that doesn't mean that it isn't important. If every one of these bills, we have new people coming on to bills. And also importantly, it's really shattered the myth that you can't speak out for Palestinian rights in Congress. All the members of Congress who have supported these bills have been reelected. It used to be said, "Oh, I can't say anything publicly because the opposition will make sure that I don't have a seat in Congress again." But that hasn't been the case. In fact, Betty McCollum has been winning her reelections every 2 years, and more younger members of Congress who are coming in with even bolder positions and stronger voices. So I think that a bill like this is, even if it doesn't come to a vote for the full Congress, it is a conversation that is happening in the halls of Congress, and all of us are doing our part, at the grassroots level, and also in Congress to talk to staffers, to talk to members of Congress, to show what's happening on the ground, and to say we don't want to be culpable. We can't be undermining these abuses and violations.
Aya, looking over the list of organizations that support the bill, are there any that stand out to you? Any surprises?
To me, it doesn't seem surprising because I'm in this work, so I know how everything is functioning. But I will say, generally speaking, whether it has to do with the supporting organizations or members of Congress, I think it's all it all comes to show how important this work is, how important advocacy is in general, because without the work of the advocates that came before us, legislation like this would not have been possible at all. It's pretty new that, you'll have members of Congress come out and introduce such legislation when the word Palestine was barely even mentioned 10 years ago within the halls of Congress. So I think it all just speaks to our efforts and that the change is possible, no matter how slow it might seem.
Very, very true. And I feel like a lot of the fact that social media has also broken that hold that mainstream corporate media had over this issue. And much of this is being able, people are able to see what is happening on the ground, whereas before they were not able to because it wasn't shown on our TV screens. So that's obviously had an impact as well. So we'll be discussing this and much more after the break. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Jennifer, I'd like to ask you, what has been the Biden administration's take on this issue?
I have to say it's been pretty disappointing to not have a better response from a president who says that he's committed to human rights. And I'm sure it's not lost on many people to watch how much he has become a champion of people in Ukraine and not having the same kind of standard when it comes to Palestinians who've lived under much longer occupation and who are being killed and detained with U.S. weapons. Just unbelievable to watch drone attacks and U.S. Apache helicopters firing into a refugee camp in Jenin with no condemnation from the administration. So it's super important for members of Congress to continue to play their part in pressing the Biden administration and the State Department to address these abuses and to speak up and use its leverage, which is significant, not only from the military aid and other aid that comes from the United States to the State of Israel, but also the kind of diplomatic support. I have you mentioned at the top of the hour that the world community recognizes that an apartheid system exists, and Israeli apartheid needs to be challenged strongly from all of us who have a commitment to fairness and equality and justice for all people.
So as Jennifer, you were talking about, the UN Special Rapporteur has also noted that she's the Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories, has recently very strongly called out Israel for the two laws system, one set of laws for Israeli settlers and another set of laws for Palestinians. And further to that, in the United States, 14 members of Congress emphasized the need for such legislation as proposed by Congresswoman Betty McCollum in a joint letter to the Biden administration in April 2023. And it states that at this inflection point, we ask your administration to undertake a shift in US policy in recognition of the worsening violence, further annexation of land, and denial of Palestinian rights. So this is a very important point in history, that not only on the streets, we're seeing support on the streets for Palestine, but we're also seeing increasing support in Congress. I don't think, as Aya was mentioning earlier, that 10 years ago we would have seen such a letter. Aya, as we look at this bill and we talk about these children, and obviously there's the physical torture, there's all of that. But I really would like you to talk about the psychological impact that these detentions, this separate set of laws have on Palestinian children and Palestinian families. Um, the denial of fundamental human rights. We hear that we heard earlier about the brutal night raids, limited access or no access to legal support, medicine. Tazeen talked about food inadequacy, medicine inadequacy in the jail system. So, what impact does this have on? What psychological impact does this have?
Oh man, I think it has grave psychological impact, especially when you look at, there's been multiple studies. I mean, one of my colleagues is doing her PhD, and it's on the prison systems that Israel upholds and as they pertain to Palestinian detainees. And as Jennifer mentioned, Israel is the only country in the world to detain Palestinian children in military courts and put them on trial in military courts. And I think the whole process is torture. The torture doesn't begin when they're detained. It begins from the minute a Palestinian is born, from the way that these children are detained. You're having night raids where most of the time these soldiers are going into families' homes in the middle of the night, only speaking in Hebrew, only giving paperwork in Hebrew, which most of the time these Palestinians cannot read, not allowing contact between the family and their child or their husband or their wife or their daughter or their son. Um, and you see this everywhere. I mean, when there was a Palestinian American detained back in December, she was not allowed to communicate with her family for 3 days, and she's an American citizen. They moved her 3 times. She was detained for 4 days, and her family knew nothing about her. So it's all torture. From all the tactics they're utilizing are torture. So it has grave psychological impact. And when you look at these children, you have children ranging from 4 to 14-year-olds that feel like they have to carry the world on their backs, and they're intelligent beyond means. And while it's admirable, it's absolutely heartbreaking, because no child should feel like they need to know how to react to a certain situation when it comes to Israel detaining their father or detaining them.
Hearing all of this, Tazeen, could you tell us what can Americans do? It's our tax dollars that are being used to fund this oppression. What can we do?
I believe Americans should support this legislation. They should contact their congresspersons, congresswomen, and they should persuade them. They should raise their concerns about this injustice. I mean, unfair attitudes and brutalities, atrocities of the Israeli military detention system when we are talking about the children, and same is true for the occupation. They should try their best, and they should support HR 3103 in the Congress.
So, how do we do this in a country where boycotting Israeli products is seen as anti Semitism, where teachers are being removed from their jobs because of their support for Palestine? People are scared. People are scared to pick up the phone and speak to their congresspeople because they don't know what to say. So, Jennifer, how can I talk to my congressperson, and what could you share some tips with us about this bill?
Well, I always try to encourage people to lead with their values, lead with what's important to you, and you try to establish common ground. A lot of times people will say, oh, well, my member of Congress is a Trump Republican, or my member of Congress never responds to my messages. But I think you do want to lead with a sense of of fairness. I think all Americans feel like we live in a country that prides itself on trying to live up to equal rights for all, and that's what we're asking for here. It's unfair that people who live in the same territory have two separate law systems. That's just unjust. And that's not that shouldn't be a scary thing for anyone to say. That's just an issue of basic fairness. All people want to be able to protect their children, and that also is a desire of everyone, and we need to create conditions so that people are able to do that. And what is preventing that? What is preventing Palestinians from children from being able to care more about which soccer team they're rooting for in the World Cup, rather than is do they need to sleep in their clothes at night because the Israeli soldiers may come and grab them in the middle of the night, and they'll be too embarrassed if they're in their pajamas when they go off to jail. Like we I think it helps to like humanize the story, like make it clear, and make it clear that it matters to you. People respond well if you're passionate, and I would encourage people to not hold back with your emotion. Like it's upsetting to see your family members, or even if they're not your family members, it's upsetting to see the kind of injustice that is happening. And we have to hold our elected officials into account, and we have to ask them to be better. We want them to do the right thing, and we want them to represent us. And if they don't, then we're going to continue to build our movement and find people who will. And that's the great work that Aya and her organization is doing, to find candidates who will support us, and to learn the political system. I'm so thrilled to see more and more young people saying, advocacy matters. Like, I want to know how Congress works. I want to know how to make a phone call, or how to write a letter, and how to be effective. And more people are doing that. And I think that's super empowering, and that's what's going to bring the change. I think we'll get there. I believe it will happen, inshallah.
No, that's excellent. I just saw this rap video, and I don't think I've ever seen it. It was by a Black artist, and he was rapping about how it's not just the presidential election that's so important for people to get involved with, and that's what the hype is all about. But it's the every 2 years, the Congress elections for Congress, elections for judges, and just really, it was really kind of cool to see rap being used to encourage people to get out and vote about topics that they're passionate about, and especially this topic of just imagining a child being taken away in the middle of the night from their home, and then being put in solitary confinement until they confess to something that they can't even understand, is just such a powerful narrative that all of us should be using to advocate for the passage of this bill. And this is a system. That's the way the system works here. And for people to get involved in that system is so absolutely important. So those of you who are watching the show in the United States, please get involved and talk to your, go get out and talk to your congresspeople. Now, Tazeen, you advocate in Canada as well. So how has advocacy for Palestinian children been conducted in Canada? And what are some of the key demands that Canadians should be making of their government?
Alhamdulillah, here in Canada, multiple organizations, along with Justice for All Canada, are working for the same cause. I mean, Just Peace Advocates, CPJME, Canadians for Peace and Justice in the Middle East, they recently published a report, and they compared what a Canadian minor detainee faces in Canada to what a Palestinian detainee faces in Israel or the West Bank or the East Jerusalem. So, as you asked, one demand, I would like to say that Canadian parliamentarians should also initiate similar legislations in the Canadian Parliament. We are working for that. We are also working for to begin investigations to pressurize, to persuade Canadian government to begin investigations against the Israeli crimes against humanity. And we are also pushing Canada to basically withdrew its position as the Canadian government denied, did not support it actually, the Israeli investigations in the International Criminal Court. So we are persuading Canadian parliamentarians to that. Our NDP MP Heather McPherson, she is very active regarding the Palestinians, and some of the other MPs are also, and we are also working with them. Recently, during the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's visit, some of the Canadian organizations, basically they filed a court case that because expansions are crimes against humanity, so Canadian immigration should not allow entry to Naftali Bennett, who was the Prime Minister when expansions were going on uh, during his prime ministership in 2021 and 2022. And then they also persuaded Canadian court system. I mean, they in the court case they filed, they also say that we should investigate if he enters in Canada. We should investigate his crimes against humanity, because we have done that with Rwandan and Holocaust criminals.
Very interesting. Well, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back for the last segment of our show. Welcome back. Thank you so much to all three of our wonderful advocates and guests who were here on this show. I'm going to give you all a chance to at least let us know where we can follow your work, where we can follow your action alerts. Please go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. And thanks so much for inviting me to this important conversation. As I mentioned, we do have a campaign called No Way to Treat a Child. And if you go to nowaytotreatachild.org, it is an international campaign. So we have partners in Canada and the UK and parts of Europe and all over the world, but it is a bit US centric. But if you go to that website, you can see lots of information, both about the Palestinian Children and Families Act, HR 3103, that we were talking about today, but also lots of reports and videos that you can watch for free where children talk about their experiences in military detention, and lots of ideas for people to take action in your community.
Thank you for that. Aya, where can we find more of your work?
Yeah, you can find more of our work at agpaction.org as well as ampalestine.org. AM Palestine is our C3 organization, so it focuses more on grassroots advocacy and just grassroots and education in general, while AGP Action is our C4, so it gives us more lobbying rights and allows us to engage more with government officials. We actually have our Advocacy Week coming up in October, and we're going back in person this year. You can check it out and register at agpaction.org.
Thank you so much for that. And Tazeen.
First, I would appreciate Jennifer and Ada. Mashallah, they are doing wonderful. And then I would mention justiceforall.org. We have regular updates in the form of statements, blogs, op-eds regarding the Palestinian Children Bill and whatever is happening in Palestine. And we have justiceforallcanada.org. So you can follow on these two places.
Well, thank you to all three of you for your work and for joining us today. Thank you for those of you who are watching. Do join this cause for Palestinian children in whatever way and capacity that you are able to. I'd like to, at this point, give a shout out to my producer, Asim Amin, my associate producer, Miriam Tisdale, and our wonderful interns, Naira and Abdul Malik, for their contribution to the show. And join us again next week. Assalamu alaikum and good night.